I'm filming this video on the hip thrust to urge you to use common sense when you stumble across information online pertaining to the hip thrust exercise. I can tell you some of my personal experiences. I've been lifting weights for 25 years, personal training for 20 years, and for the past 10 years I've been performing and prescribing the hip thrust. First of all, when I started prescribing the hip thrust, my ability to help my clients develop their glutes increased dramatically, but also back pain went down. I've personally hip thrusted 800 pounds for 1 rep, 585 for 10 reps, 495 for 15 reps, and 405 for 20 reps. And my back health has never been better, and my glutes have never been bigger and stronger. So lately I've been reading some things online by various people who are admonishing the hip thrust, and this is to be expected. The same thing happened to the bench press, the squat, the deadlift. When these exercises became popular, people scoffed at them. First of all, people don't like change, and then a lot of people are just jealous of the hip thrust popularity. Some of them probably really do think it's dangerous, but just as legendary strength coach Dan John said, the squat is not dangerous, but what you're doing is dangerous. How you're squatting is dangerous. The same thing applies to every exercise. If you squat with good form, chances are you're going to be okay. Same with deadlifts. Same with hip thrusts. But if you hip thrust with poor form, then you're upping the risk a little bit. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to perform the hip thrust to dramatically reduce the risk of ever developing any issues in your back. So the following tip I credit to Bruno. Ben and I were speaking on the phone, and he said, you know, Bret, one of the cues I give to my clients is I have them look where the wall meets the ceiling, and it tends to fix everything. And at that same time, I was noticing whenever I'd have a client doing the hip thrust that I put on Instagram, for the thumbnail, I'd see that they were tucking their chin. And I had this aha moment. So now I cue people to just look forward. If there's a mirror, look at yourself in the mirror. And this fixes everything, and let me tell you why. Over the years, I've had plenty of clients look up when they're at the top. They go like this. And most of them are fine. The vast majority never develop any back pain when doing it that way. But every once in a while, maybe like 1 in 5 clients will start to develop issues when they do that. The reason why, I'll explain with Skelly in a minute. If you look straight forward in the mirror, like this, and then keep your gaze there the whole time, here's what happens. You come up, and then right here, your chin starts to tuck, but it keeps your ribs down. Your chest doesn't pop up, so your ribs stay down. You come up, and then right here, it's glutes pushing the hips straight up. So you have this nice flat torso, and the hips, they don't go into anterior pelvic tilt. They might slightly posterior pelvic tilt, but it keeps everything good. Here's what it looks like when you use weight. So I'm going to roll the bar into position, get my legs up, take a deep breath. And notice that my gaze stays forward the entire time. When you do it this way, you can do any rep range. You can do the heaviest weight you can do for 1 rep with that form, and you'll be fine. You can do 3 reps, you can do 5 reps, you can do 10 reps, you can do 20 reps, you can do sets of 50 if you want, as long as you keep that form. But if you go so heavy that you end up not being able to do this, and you end up looking up, watch what happens. Chest pops up, now I'm in spinal hyperextension, now I can create some issues. And on the same lines, if you're repping out and you get, 2 reps that's really hard, and then you squeeze out a couple more, but you go like this, again, chest up. So you need to have the diligence to stop the set before that happens. And it's the same thing for the squat and the deadlift. If you're deadlifting and you start to round, the set ends. You don't just keep squeezing reps out while letting your back position do whatever it feels like. You have to develop the grit and the knowledge and the consistency and the discipline to keep your form in check. So here's Skelly, who's going to help out here. If you look up, you will, and this isn't very flexible, but you can see that everything's going to come up. The ribs flare, the chest comes up, and the spine hyperextends. And when the spine, and also the pelvis, will anteriorly rotate. So it's like you're cranking on these to reach greater heights. When that happens, there's these bones in the back of the vertebrae that can jam together. You can start to develop issues like spondylolysis, spondylolisthesis, facet joint injuries and things like that. And that's probably what's going on with a lot of people when they develop back pain with the hip thrust. And again, it only happens with maybe like 1 in 5 people, and obviously load and effort and volume and frequency matter. How you design your program matters. Some people get away with it, some people don't. Obviously your anatomy, that plays a role in determining whether you get back pain or not. And there's also pain in and of itself is complicated because pain science, there's a lot more than just biomechanics and structure and posture to pain. Nevertheless, when you do the hip thrust, if you look forward and the hips just pop up, you don't go into hyperextension. The pelvis does not anteriorly rotate. It pushes straight up. The glutes push the hips straight up. And this doesn't hyperextend. The ribs stay down. So the things you want are forward eye gaze. At the top you want chin tuck. You want flat torso, ribs down. And you want the glutes pushing the hips straight up, staying in neutral or slightly posterior pelvic tilt. So if you do the hip thrust the way I just showed you how to do, I'm almost positive you'll be fine. Yes, there's the occasional lifter that can't hip thrust. There's also the occasional lifter who can't squat or who can't deadlift, but the vast majority of people can. Every single client I've ever trained for the last 10 years has done hip thrust. Hundreds, if not thousands. I also have thousands of people who have done my program Strong Curves. I have thousands of people who have done my programs Get Glutes and Strong by Bret, and I'm not exaggerating. Over the last 10 years, I have probably received, again, I'm not exaggerating, probably 1,000 emails from people saying, when I started doing the hip thrust, my back pain went away. And it could be for different reasons. Maybe it has to do with glute strength or confidence or something, but I can tell you for certain that the hip thrust is good for the body. It's good for the back, it's good for the glutes, it's good for everything as long as you do it right. So do it that way, you should be fine, and you won't develop any back issues as long as your volume and frequency is sound and reasonable. It's just very important to kind of try to see people's motives when you read stuff online. I don't want to tell you don't listen to people because it's important to have an open mind and listen to different people, but you gotta go with the experts. Speaking of myself, I have my PhD in biomechanics. I've done my doctoral thesis on hip thrust versus squats. I've trained hundreds and hundreds of clients over the past decade in the hip thrust. I've figured out exactly how to make it safe and how to program it effectively, and I've done it myself. So if someone doesn't have that kind of experience, you go to their social media and you don't see anyone doing the hip thrust. You can go to my Instagram and my YouTube channel and see people doing it 7 years ago and all along the way. So this is evidence that I know what I'm talking about. But these other people that write these articles and say these things, they don't have those kind of evidence that they understand the hip thrust. And they're just like the people who, back in the day when squats became popular, said squats are bad for your knees. They probably saw a video of me doing it with heavy weight, not knowing that I started off 10 years ago using 185 pounds. My first workout with the hip thrust was with 185. It took me 3 years to use 405 pounds. It took me 5 years to use 495, and so on. And so I've gradually progressed along the way. So they might see a guy like me and go, oh, I can hip thrust the way he can. And they might jump right into 500 pounds and try it. And then they hurt themselves or they don't feel it in the right places because they're using too much weight to maintain proper form, the form that I showed you. You guys, I've had powerlifters who had to start off with body weight hip thrust because it's just a new movement. It strengthens end range hip extension. They were lacking that. They might have had really good flex range hip extension strength, but it's highly variable. I've also had powerlifters start off with 500 pounds. It's very unique to the individual, and some of these people probably, jumped the gun and used heavy load when they should have started off really light. They would have loved it. And so rather than take the time to investigate what they're doing wrong, they just write an article or something saying, oh my God, it's bad for you and it's dangerous. And these same people will say like it's more dangerous than the squat or the deadlift. And I'm like, what? I do squats, I do deadlifts, I do hip thrusts. And when I'm squatting the heaviest weight possible, I'm scared. When I go for a new deadlift PR, I've deadlifted 615 pounds and I've done 585 for 2 reps. I'm scared. Some bad stuff can happen if you don't have the discipline to keep your form in check. Whereas with the hip thrust, let's say I load the bar up with 850 pounds and I try a 1 RM, here's what happens. I go, and I get it to here and I can't lock it out. Maybe I go like this and go, and arch a little bit, but that usually doesn't cause an injury. It's not very common that you have an acute injury with the hip thrust. They're usually chronic. You arch too much, you hyperextend for long periods of time, for months on end, and you start developing back pain. Whereas with the squat or the deadlift, especially the deadlift, if you round too much, you can have an acute injury where you herniate a disc or something like that. These do not incriminate the exercise itself. It incriminates the person for not learning and understanding proper form. Once again, the hip thrust is very safe, very safe. I've had 0 injuries in 10 years of prescribing the hip thrust, and I've only had 1 or 2 clients over the last decade who even started complaining of some discomfort. I can always help fix people's form to where they feel it in the glutes and they feel it in the right areas. Now, if you are a bodybuilder, if you're a physique competitor, if you're just training to improve your physique, you don't have to do a 1 rep max hip thrust. You can do most of your sets between 8 and 15 reps. That will yield very good results. But if you like variety, if you like going heavy, if you're a powerlifter and you think that heavy hip thrust will transfer better to your maximum deadlift or squat strength, it's okay to do 1 rep, it's okay to do 3 reps. You just have to have the discipline to keep your form in check. So just remember, I'm going to say this one last time. At the top of a hip thrust, you want eye gaze forward, chin tucked, ribs down, torso flat, glutes pushing the hips all the way up. If you do that, everything will be fine.